Welcome to Creating Assets, presented by AssetWise of Avara Performance Management. In this module, you will learn how to create assets in the APM software. You will learn how to create a single asset from scratch and how to copy assets to create new asset objects. You will also learn how to create multiple assets at a single time. This topic consists of two videos. In the first, we will create an asset from scratch. In the second video, we will create assets as a copy. As we have seen in previous topics, assets are physical pieces of equipment that an organization needs to operate and maintain in order to meet its operations effectiveness goals. In APM, each asset has a unique asset record which is used to track all of the information related to the asset. Some organizations use a CMMS system to plan and schedule work and to capture associated costs, but they use APM to manage their asset reliability program. To do this effectively, assets are included in both systems. Information about the asset is synchronized between the two systems. This is called integration. In the case of integration, it is usually the CMMS that is the master system for assets. Here, the assets from the CMMS are uploaded or imported into APM as part of implementation, and there is little to be done to the assets in APM. In other cases, the assets may exist in a system which is being replaced by APM. In these cases, the assets may be imported to APM and the asset records revised as may be required. In many cases, however, assets are created manually in APM as part of the asset hierarchy development. In this module, we will look at manually creating assets from scratch in the APM software and also by copying an existing asset. The manner in which assets are created is the same regardless of the asset classification. However, note that some fields are not available for every asset classification. In our examples, we will be creating maintainable assets. The first asset we will create is a tank, which is part of the water and steam system. Assets are created from the site's asset view. To create an asset from scratch, click the Listing tab and then click New. An asset window opens to the Properties view, General tab. An asset number is automatically assigned by the APM software. You can change the number if you want, but each asset number must be unique. Enter a name for the asset. Follow the format that your organization has derived for standard asset names. Press Tab to move to the next field. If a barcode is to be associated with the asset, enter the barcode number in the barcode field. Click the drop-down arrow beside Type and select the appropriate asset type from the value list that appears. Here we will select Tank Vessel. Note that Tank appears in the subtype field. This is because the asset subtype is available for assets of this type. There may be more than one subtype available. When a subtype is selected, a Specifications tab for that subtype is added to the asset's properties view. As you can see, the subtype page includes several tabs where specifications about the tank and its physical and operating properties can be defined. This information is often used when tracking degradation. We do not want to track degradation for the tank asset that is being created now. On the General tab, click the Asset Type drop-down. From the list, select Tank. Notice that there is no subtype shown and that the Tank Specifications tab does not appear. This is because the tank asset type does not have any associated subtypes. Select the asset classification. By default, the classification that is associated with the asset type appears. The asset type must be set to allow changes to the classification for you to make changes here. Click the drop-down arrow beside Consequence Priority and select from the list that appears. If the consequence priority for the asset is not known, select either Not Analyzed or To be Analyzed. Not every asset will be part of a function group, but if the asset you are creating is part of a function group, select the group from the function group list. If the appropriate group does not already exist, and if your permissions within the APM software permit, You can press F3 in the function group box and create a new group. For this exercise, we will leave the function group blank. The type of material that is used for the asset will have an impact on the asset's degradation. If you want to identify the material that the asset is made of, click the drop-down beside Material Type. Here you will find a list of material types that have been defined as part of the failure mode settings. Select from the list. If you do not want to specify the material, leave the value as None. Note that you cannot create a new material type from the asset object. Use the Location tab to identify the asset's parent asset and the hierarchy code for the asset that you are creating. You can enter text that describes the physical location of the asset, such as Building A, adjacent to Blender, etc. You can also associate the asset to an area which identifies its physical location at the site. The area is used on check sheets to show all of the indicators within a particular area of the site. You can select an area from a value list but cannot create a new area from the asset object. Areas are defined in the Asset Management settings. The asset's age is often used in determining asset health. The age can be determined by referencing the date of manufacture, the asset's life start date, or comparing both dates and using the later of the two. You cannot add the asset's age directly on the asset object when the asset is created. You can, however, enter an expected replacement date for the asset if it is known. In our example, we expect that the tank will need to be replaced in 2033, 20 years from now. Click the drop-down in the Expected Replacement Date field. A calendar with the current date is shown. Since we don't know what day of the week it will be in 20 years from today, we cannot simply change the year. Instead, we need to navigate to the appropriate date. Click the month and year shown at the top of the calendar. The view changes to all of the months for the current year. Click the year. A selection of years is shown. Use the forward arrow to advance to the year that you want. Click the year and then the month and day to use for the expected replacement date. For example, click the Description tab if you want to enter descriptions for the asset, its processes, and degradation, if applicable. Click the Downtime tab. If the asset type's policies permit the reporting of downtime incidents for the assets of this type, you can, for this asset, identify the source of downtime costs and downtime cost rules. In the Source of Downtime Costs section, select whether downtime cost values are calculated for this asset or if they are calculated based on values from the asset's ancestors' assets. In the Downtime Cost Rules section, identify the downtime cost rules to apply. You can calculate downtime as both production units and monetary value, as production units only, as a monetary value only, or not to calculate downtime at all. If calculating downtime costs, you can create rules that are used to determine the cost. The setup of downtime cost rules is addressed as part of downtime training and is not covered here. There may be procedures that apply when working with this asset. Examples are standard lockout or tagout procedures, safety notes, material data safety sheets, or manufacturer specification sheets. Click Browse to search for and select the procedures to use. From the Standard Procedure Selector dialog, click one or more procedures and then click OK. The procedures are added to the asset object. Information about the manufacturer of the asset can be added to the asset object as long as the asset classification is maintainable, system, subsystem, or component. You can specify manufacturer information for this asset only by selecting the Defined on this Asset radio button. Proceed to select a manufacturer from the drop-down list and then enter information about the model number, such as the original equipment manufacturer's or OEM assigned number, the serial number, and the year that the asset was manufactured. Enter the life expectancy for the asset in terms of time, such as days, months, or years, or in units. These may be a number of parts or containers, liters, tons, or similar measurement. Finally, you can enter notes for the asset. If the asset being created is one of a manufacturer's models, the model information will already have been created on the manufacturer record. In this case, on the Manufacturer's tab, click the Manufacturer Model Info radio button. Then browse for the manufacturer. Select a model number. The model number must already exist and be included on the manufacturer record. The remaining model information appears automatically. Click the Purchase tab and enter the purchasing details for the asset. This includes the original purchase order number if it is known, the purchase date and cost, and the date that the asset was put in service. This date may be different from the purchase date. Enter the expected replacement date. Barriers are used to mitigate or slow asset degradation. Barriers can be coatings, liners, corrosion inhibitors, etc. To add barrier information to the asset type must be set to allow barriers to be defined for it. To add one or more barriers to the asset, click the Barriers tab and then click New. A property dialog for barriers opens. Select a barrier type from the drop-down list and then select its expected effectiveness. The barrier can be primary or secondary. A primary barrier is the most effective in controlling deterioration, whereas a secondary barrier is less effective or is effective for a limited time only. On the Compliance tab, set the compliance status and the reason for the status. The compliance status indicates the extent to which the barrier is in place. The compliance reason indicates why the barrier is or is not compliant. For example, a barrier may not be compliant because the necessary coating has not been applied. In the Monitoring Note box, enter information about how the barrier's effectiveness is being monitored. Click the Monitoring Indicators tab. Here you can select or create indicators to be used to check the effectiveness of the barrier. For this asset, we will not identify monitoring indicators. The Failure Modes tab displays the failure modes for the asset. The failure modes are developed as part of a strategy development analysis such as MTA2 or RCM2. They are not directly entered onto the asset object. If you want, you can enter a description of the barrier and its properties. The History tab shows the activity of the asset. Nothing is entered here directly on the asset object. Click OK to close the Barrier Properties dialog. Click the Options tab. Here you can set the default values to apply when creating work documents for this asset. Select values for work type, classification, work priority, and maintenance group. When work documents are created, the values selected here will appear. They can be overridden if necessary. You may require that activities for the asset be approved. You can define approval routes and settings for work requests, work orders, asset transfers, inspection reports, and asset health reports. For each activity of the asset requiring approval, you will need to specify the approval route to use. You can set up a new approval route directly on the asset and select the employees who will act as approvers on the route. Alternatively, you can set approvals for the site and its assets, etc. from the Site's Approvals View Settings tab. For this tank asset, we do not require any approvals to be in place. Finally, for the asset, specify the CMMS options. If your organization uses a CMMS system for work planning and scheduling, you may need to integrate APM assets to the external CMMS system. Click the checkbox beside an equivalent asset exists in the CMMS, and then select the asset type for the CMMS and the unique identifier number of the asset in the CMMS. Save the asset and then close the window. You are returned to the Assets View Listing tab. The asset has been created. In Part 2 of this module, we will create asset copies.